All right, welcome back. Pay no attention to any animals in the background. Uh, I'm going to talk a little bit today about an issue that people are discussing regarding Afghanistan, which has turned out to be a total disaster. But many people are asking, why is it that the media is suddenly developing a pair of balls and going after the Biden administration, at least with regards to that crisis, right? Because they're not really going after him over the southern border, over mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic, over the erosion of civil liberties. They're not going after him regarding inflation, and they're not going after him regarding bad jobs economy and all the other negative things that are going on. So why specifically Afghanistan? And I made a video yesterday night, but it was a little too disorganized, so I figured I'd write down a few notes. So the thing is, I think you have to divide it between things that are the media's interest and things that are the interest of the corporate class as a whole, beyond just the media. The corporate government class, the people who are called the elites. And both of them are driving, I think, President Biden into a ditch that he'd already been in the direction of because of his own policies. So he got himself into this mess. He's not really equipped to get himself out. And now everyone else is pushing him further along the tracks. It's sort of like he's a locomotive engine that can't stop. And there's all these little cars that are attached to him, and all the momentum is just keeps carrying him. So if you're talking about media needs, the real key is that they have been starving. If you're talking about TV networks especially, but also, by the way, the Huffington Post and BuzzFeed and all of those media online outlets are starving for ratings and for clicks because the real big attraction is gone. President Trump is not really in the news as much anymore. And if he is, it's not really bumping their ratings up because the people who voted against Trump, I think that they're not interested in hearing about him anymore. They really wanted to be rid of him. And the people who were supporters of Trump aren't going to start watching MSNBC or CNN or Bloomberg anymore. They've already been embittered. So what the media needs is a big slice of drama that they can latch onto that creates a lot of ratings. And the oldest adage in the news business, at least as far as TV, is that if it bleeds, it leads. And Afghanistan is bleeding like a river right now, like a river of blood. So it certainly fits the bill. The other thing is that I think that they do have an interest. It might not be the top reason because I don't think that they're that ethical, but you have to remember these networks in some cases do have their own reporters on the ground in harm's way dealing with this crisis. So it would be the height of irresponsibility for them to misreport what's going on the ground and ignore the people who are actually there. There's got to be a reason you sent them there, and if you're not going to hear from them, then you have nothing to offer. People are not going to watch a network that is talking about Afghanistan if it doesn't have people there covering it from the ground, if they can find it elsewhere. And invariably, the people who are there on the ground, forget the lady from CNN, but they are reporting that the situation is very negative, that it doesn't jibe with the message that's coming out of the Pentagon or the White House or the State Department. So it's impossible for the media to reconcile what is going on in one part of the split screen and what's going on in the other part. And that would be the third reason, too, that the results are too negative to hide. Now, if it was arguable that the U.S. was able to accomplish some sort of strategic goal in Afghanistan, or that they transferred the region into more secure hands, or that at least it was going according to the timetable, then maybe you could make the case that there is a silver lining to what's going on. The fact of the matter is that the Biden administration bungled it entirely. All of their timetables have ended up being wrong, meaning that when they initially believed that it would take, I think, about 2 years for the regime to fall, the timeline started to shorten very quickly. It went down eventually to 30 to 60 days, and then it started to shrink to about 30 days, and then before you knew it, the Taliban was marching into Kabul, and Afghanistan's president had fled the capital to, I believe it was to the United Arab Emirates. So all of these expectations, when they go wrong so fast, it's very hard for the media to make sense of it, right? Normally, if you have an issue that you can stretch out for several days, like they used to do with Russiagate, where they would make an outrageous claim, such as the Steele dossier, which could not be refuted right on the spot, then they could bask in the ratings for a few days, and within a week, the story's been debunked, but it's already out of the news cycle. All right, so they've squeezed whatever juice they could get out of it, and now there's basically nothing else that the people who debunked the story or who refuted it or the people who corrected it, whatever you want to say, there's nothing else that they can do because it's already been squeezed of all the ratings that it can get. Afghanistan, on the other hand, happened so fast, and the networks needed to report the truth because they're desperate for the ratings to begin with, because all the stories that they've been reporting for the past several months or so have been duds. The January 6th commission and all the bawling and crying over that. They were talking about, there was, I think, some stuff to do with student debt relief and also the eviction moratorium and climate change. And don't forget the COVID fear porn and all that. So all that stuff, it's not really driving their ratings now. So Afghanistan, in order to get the ratings, they needed to cover it. And in order to get to cover it, they needed to cover it truthfully, because there's no way that they could put a good face on it, right? So, and that's another issue. Beyond the fact that the situation itself is so bad that the media can't cover up for it, the White House and the rest of the federal government's messaging on it has been so poorly put together and so clumsily composed, and it just doesn't match. One department doesn't know what the other is saying. If you look at the press conference with Antony Blinken and a press conference with the people at the Pentagon, the message doesn't match, right? There was recently, for example, a report that if you wanted to be evacuated from Kabul as a U.S. citizen, you would have to pay a $2,000 fee. And then apparently the State Department said that that's not true, but then it came out again. So the messaging is so mixed up that the media can't help but point out that we don't have a way to actually communicate what you're saying, because you're not communicating effectively either. So it's been a disaster in terms of that, regarding the way the White House has managed messaging. And don't forget, this is something that you guys will probably, in the comments, if you're only watching up until now, you'll already be commenting, well, the reason is because Biden is asleep at the wheel or everything. That really comes to play the most with the communication. This is a guy who can't remember when he did anything, why, what information he had. He can't remember the plan that he had. He's been apparently getting lists, and he even said so today, lists of people that he's allowed to call on from the media. So a person who's a horrible communicator, and he's at the top of the pyramid, the people at the bottom have to scramble in order to correct what he's saying, and none of them are correcting him in the same way. So that's one of the reasons that the media coverage has been so negative. And a lot of people, I'm sure it might just be their professional disgruntled attitude. It's nothing to do with wanting to do a good job, but they don't want to have too hard of a job. People like Jake Tapper are like, I would support you if you would give me something to support. That's basically what's going on here. Then we're talking about the needs of the system as a whole, beyond the media. So you have to remember the corporate media is driven by a lot of sponsorship, by ad revenue from companies that are willing to buy ad time on their networks. And many of those companies, they profit from war. They are very much into the business of keeping a conflict going. And the truth of the matter is that for some of those companies, this is really the worst possible scenario, because they built their entire reputation on the fact that they supply the troops in the Middle East, or they supply the allies of the U.S. in the middle, whether it's the Middle East or East Asia or Europe or whatever. And here we see this example of where their contribution is just put to such shame, because the U.S. military is being made a point of ridicule. The Afghan army completely evaporated. Supposedly they have the best equipment in the world. Whose hands is that equipment in now? It's the Taliban, the people we were supposed to be defeating. So basically, it's been one disaster after another for the people who had all these interests in a successful outcome for the Afghan war. And all Biden really had to do was try to resolve the situation, in a very neat manner. And maybe soon in the future, the U.S. would commit to a different, better war for these corporate interests. But now it's going to be harder. Now it's going to be much more difficult, because the people have sacrificed so much. The people in the military, the people who have lost their friends and family to the war, the people who have come back and they're scarred from their experience there. They're addicted and everything. And there's no enthusiasm to go to war again because of the result that Biden has gotten out of the pullout from Afghanistan. If it had been something that was a little bit more organized and drawn out and not so sudden, maybe we wouldn't be talking about it this way. And it might be very bad. It would still be awful, and that Taliban would take over, but it would be much slower and harder for the media to portray as the disaster that it really is. And then the final issue is that you have to remember, so we have a major corporate interest in the U.S. All these companies that are here in the U.S. that, they're from point one of the system needs. They have an interest that the U.S. appear very strong overseas. On top of that, you have other nations in Europe, whether it is Italy or Germany or the British or Israel or the Saudi Arabians, right? That they depend on their alliance with the U.S. to be a deterrent against their strategic enemies, such as Iran, China, Russia, or what have you. So with such a humiliation, with such an awful show of incompetence at the very top of the U.S. military, there's an article I've submitted recently about that, they can't hide their disgust with it. So when other nations are openly talking about how awful it's going, and the president of France and Biden isn't even communicating with them, and you see just how Kamala Harris has been almost completely AWOL on this. She's gone to East Asia in the middle of this crisis. So nobody can hide it. Not the media, not the media's corporate enablers, and not the various allied countries who have their own corporate interests that depend on the U.S. military and the empire, as many of its critics would call it, to be successful, or at least to save face when they're retreating. So that's about it for right now. I do have to go. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute and Rumble and Odyssey. Please, I prefer on those different alternative social media. And you can find me also on Gab and Minds, and support me through Subscribestar, and have a great day.